Hello, one and all, and welcome to Film Fragments, a podcast where we take fragments of an actor, director, or genre and tell you our favorites from their catalog. My name is Bryan. I'm your host, and I'm very excited to welcome you guys to this week's episode of Film Fragments, where we're joined by Larry FEAT of My Favorite Movie Is, and we're going to be talking about Jim Carrey. Cannot wait for you guys to hear this lengthy but very exciting and very entertaining, and honestly at times very emotional conversation about one of the great comic performers that we've ever had. So ladies and gentlemen, sit back, relax, and enjoy my conversation with Larry FEAT about Jim Carrey. Hello, Larry. How you doing today?
What's going on, Bryan? Pleasure to be here. I'm doing very well.
I am so excited to welcome you to Film Fragments to talk about the topic that we're going to be talking about, Jim Carrey. Very excited to have you on here to talk about this man.
So lucky to be here to talk about it.
So Larry, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're coming from. Talk a little bit about your podcast, My Favorite Movie Is. Wow, I can't talk. I'm so excited to have you on. My Favorite Movie Is one of the best, straight up, one of the best movie podcasts out there right now. So informative, so entertaining, so exciting. Just love it so much.
So kind of you.
And talk a little bit about your love for film. Like, what got you into loving film so much?
Well, Bryan, thank you so much for those kind words. That was very well. Actually, first of all, I'm gonna turn off my dang AC machine so that way the sound is way better for your episode. It's very hot where I'm coming from, as you know, which is the same place you're coming from, which is New Jersey. One of the hottest summers on record, at least from my perspective. So yeah, I am. Again, I just want to say thank you so much. That was really kind of you to say. I'm very happy with my podcast and how the episodes have been so far, and I'm really thankful that you're enjoying them. So I come from New Jersey, same as you, Bryan. I am a writer, filmmaker, podcaster, just a storyteller all around. How did I get involved in film? That's such a convoluted question. I had always loved watching movies when I was very young, but I didn't really start pursuing film as more of a career until like the very end of high school, like sort of around my senior year. I was taking some video production courses. I was getting to know how to use a camera. I had taken a film appreciation course that sort of exposed me to a lot of like the biggest films. That class exposed me to like Citizen Kane, Amadeus, Jaws. I'm trying. There's probably like one or two more. Like Raising Arizona was another one. Like films that like a lot of people know that are sort of in the canon, so to speak. And I realized that like, what, this is what I'm really good at. This is what I really enjoy. I had been running a film culture like podcast and website for like a couple of years. I was super into like film culture and everything, and it sort of transitioned from a hobby into a career. It's hard to say exactly what got me into it, like initially, like in the very beginning. I was sort of a very introverted kid. Introverted kids watch a lot of TV from my understanding. And so I just watched a lot of TV and movies and like, whatever movies were on TV. And that sort of segues really well into Jim Carrey, because when I was young, for some reason, my parents and their cable package, it didn't have a lot of like the children's networks. So like it didn't really have like Nickelodeon or Cartoon Network or any of that stuff when I was very young. It had Disney Channel, but after a while you sort of, you get through their catalog of stuff. And so I was watching a lot of like adult television networks, or I guess like not adult in the sense of like Cinemax, but like adult in the sense of like, TBS and NBC and ABC and Fox, just like channels that were more family or adult oriented sitcoms and content and stuff like that. And so, while my friends were watching like SpongeBob and Fairly Odd Parents, I was watching like Everybody Loves Raymond and The King of Queens and shows like that. And I sort of learned a lot very young. But one of the things on TBS, I don't know why, but Jim Carrey and his catalog of films were like huge on TBS. Like they were just a part of their catalog. They'd play them all the time. I think it was just because Jim Carrey was such a huge comedic face and TBS was all about comedy, and Jim Carrey and his 90s, era was just like comedic gold mine of movies at the end. I'm sure that they had the broadcast rights to them. So a lot of those early Jim Carrey films, or I'm not early, but maybe more so just like heyday, The Mask, Dumb and Dumber, Liar Liar, Ace Ventura, both 1 and 2. I was exposed to all of those films through TBS, through watching them on TV. And those films were some of the first films that I really genuinely fell in love with. They're films that are like so ingrained into my consciousness that like I can't even tell you when I watched them for the first time. I can't even tell you what it was like watching them for the first time. They've just always been there. Like my family still owns Bruce Almighty on DVD. That movie was huge for me too. So like he's always just been there, and Jim Carrey's been my favorite actor for a long time. And as I've continued to get into film and love film and expanded my palette, I always feel like I can like fall back on Jim Carrey's films. They're like the ultimate comfort films for me. Guilty pleasures in which I take no guilt. Just brilliant comedic geysers of entertainment. The man is like a comedic machine. And that's why I wanted to come on here to talk about it, because a lot of these films mean so much to me, but also because I think there's a great wealth of discussion that can be had about all of these films and how they play a role into Carrey's life and what he said about the films, a lot of the depth that comes from the films. So yeah, that's a very long answer to many of those questions that you asked.
Yeah, it's very cool how Jim Carrey has left this impact on you pretty much your entire life. And yeah, I mean, he's the kind of actor to where he helps give you the escapism that you may need if you need a really great laugh. He is, in my opinion, one of the funniest actors ever. Like top 3, I would say top 3 actors that are great with comedy. He is so funny. He's one of those actors that could say something that may not necessarily be funny, but it's because how he says it that it just makes you laugh. All the expressions that he does are insane. I mean, the guy still can pull off the wild body movements and facial expressions, and the guy is 60 years old. He's in his 60s and he's still able to do things really well that crazy. He started 30 years ago. It's crazy to me. Like you watch something like, I remember when I went to go see Sonic, the first Sonic, right before COVID. It came out like just a few weeks before the whole pandemic and everything shut down. And I remember watching it, just seeing his movements and his very wild energy. I'm like, how is this guy still doing this? He is almost 60 and he's pulling this off. And then you watch the sequel and he's able to do the exact same thing. And I'm like, how does this guy have so much energy inside of him?
He goes even harder.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. He is a really great comedic actor. And I also think he's a very talented dramatic actor too. I think when he's handed really good dramatic projects, he really goes all out and gives 110%. And someone asked me yesterday, ironically, who do you say are some of the best comedians that do dramas? Like, who are a few of them that could pull it off? And Jim Carrey is absolutely one of them. I kind of wish he would do more serious dramatic roles. I would love to see him tackle more of those roles, but I really appreciate that he's given us these comedies and doing great with everything. I am a massive fan of Jim Carrey. I've been a fan of him since I was a kid, and there won't be a day where I'll stop being a fan of him. Like, I will always be a fan of him until I die.
No, absolutely. I agree. And I think that like a very fascinating transition is when you watch all of those Jim Carrey comedies and then you discover a lot of his dramatic work, which is not as, well, first of all, obviously, the ratio is much more comedy than there is drama, but every so often he would do something more dramatic in as many Jim Carrey films as I could, over a period of time. I did watch a lot of those. And I absolutely agree with you. He has a great like presence when it comes to drama. And I think that's because, this guy, we think of him as this comedic machine. We think of him as this like, bendy, elastic, comedic performer. But when you listen to interviews with him and stuff and you get to know his history, he does actually have this very humble side to him, like in person. He's actually a very like quiet, nuanced, intelligent person when you actually talk to him, which I'll get into a little bit later. There's some people have have been a little freaked out by some of the things that he has said in the past, which I'll get to later. I'm not really talking about that. I'm more so talking about before the sort of transcendentalist era of Carrey. But when you watch interviews with him, he does have this very like kind, genial, element to his personality. And when you hear about his life, like this is a man who went through a lot of tragedy. Like he was homeless for a very long time. His father got laid off and he was living out of a van for, a chunk of his life. And, he also lost his father, very shortly before, I believe it was The Mask. I think shortly before The Mask came out, he lost his father. I could be wrong about that. It might have been a different film, but it was in the heyday. It was in that heyday of like his 90s boom. And his father was super instrumental in his decision to be a comedian and to be a performer. And so he obviously knows tragedy, which I think, all of us in different ways know tragedy in one form or another. But I think for a lot of performers, I think a lot of people don't really give comedians a lot of credit that a lot of comedy can come from tragedy. Those things are sort of interlinked. And, I don't want to harp too much on, the comparisons, but obviously Robin Williams, I feel like, and Jim Carrey are sort of up in the same tier. And we know that Williams, unfortunately, there was a lot of tragedy for him as well. And he also had the uncanny ability to just completely go off, comedically. So not to say that the two are always interlinked, but there is certainly, it's to say that when Carrey was given these more dramatic roles, I think he had, just as much experience to tap into feelings like that. I don't know, maybe we'll talk about it today, maybe we won't. I'll see how your list pans out. But when he talked about doing Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, he was going through a really, really difficult breakup around that time, like a very difficult romantic situation. And that is what allowed him to tap into the necessary emotions for that movie. And I think that was most people's first exposure to Jim Carrey as a serious dramatic talent. And when you watch a performance like that, and then you listen to some interviews with Jim Carrey and about some of his philosophy and stuff like that, like there's just no surprise that he can go between both abilities so seamlessly. And then you watch Sonic the Hedgehog, and you're like, this man has not lost a beat. Like this man can truly just go between modes. And one more thing I'll say about him is that he is just one of those actors who, no matter what movie he's in, he really just elevates the whole thing. Like, I feel like he's one of those actors where if there's a movie that's coming out with Jim Carrey in it, I will go. Because even if the movie is not great, Jim Carrey being in it will be great. There will be something there for me to enjoy, something there. There's going to be value there in that movie. And I think we've seen that in a couple of his later stage films, which, we're probably not going to get into too much. Nobody's really, clamoring for Mr. Popper's Penguins 2. But he always brings it regardless of whatever role it is. And I think that's another reason why he's one of my favorite actors, because even when you can tell this movie it was maybe when you think that this movie had no reason to exist, you see Jim Carrey giving it his all, and suddenly the film just has so much more value.
Absolutely. Very well said, my friend. Very well said about Jim Carrey. I'm so excited to talk to you about him. I'm very excited to hear your list. Cannot wait for you to hear mine. So the way this is going to work, guys, is that we're going to go through our 5 through 1. Now, if I say a film at number 5, and if it's higher on Larry's list, Larry is going to say pass after I talk about it. The same goes for him. If he talks about a film that's higher on my list, I'm going to say pass after he talks about it. So, Larry, I got to ask you the important question. What is your number 5 favorite Jim Carrey film of all time?
Yeah, I'm just double checking my list. Okay. My number 5 film is a film that I have already brought up. It is a film called Bruce Almighty. So this is one of his like more. This is like a post '90s boom comedy from Jim Carrey, and it is. I recently rewatched it, like just maybe a few months ago, and it is like I. All of my thoughts on all these films are so loaded, so I'm going to try to make them. I'm going to try to organize them and condense them to something that's like valuable. But this is just another film, like many of the films we're going to talk about today, where this is just Jim Carrey being just so comedically in tune with the movie that he is in, and just really perfectly providing all of the laughs and the comedy of the premise. So for those who haven't seen Bruce Almighty, the basic premise of the movie is that it's about a man who feels like who feels like he has been given the short end of the stick, who his life is sort of falling apart. Well, his life is sort of falling apart. It's more so that he's just not really grateful for the things that he has in his life, and God, played by Morgan Freeman, which just talked about another iconic part of this movie. God shows up to him and gives him God's abilities for, I believe it's like a week. And he doesn't believe him at first, and then suddenly he can, do these crazy things and split his Red Sea of tomato soup, and suddenly he has God powers, and obviously he goes rampant with them. But really, the entire story is about, finding a deeper appreciation for the things that you have in your life, you know, finding a connection to God in a really interesting way. I think that this movie, like, some people, I saw one Letterboxd review that called this movie like Christian propaganda, which is like kind of ridiculous, but I do understand where they're coming from, in the sense that like it is interesting to see how this movie like portrays balance their relationship with God, which is one of the sort of elements of depth that this movie I think never really gets enough credit for. But obviously, the main star of the show is Jim Carrey, and he's not going as crazy in this movie as some of his earlier films in the '90s, but it's just he just makes so many moments in this film just like iconic to the bit. Like there's that there's that iconic shot where he blows open the fire hydrant, the woman's dress comes up, and he's just like, whoa, like he is totally in tune with everything that this movie is doing. And there's also that great scene where he basically seduces his wife after having a huge fight with her, and he whips himself backwards and all of his clothes come off in a great practical effect. And it's great comedic moments like that sell this movie's premise. This movie's premise is ridiculous. It requires a suspension of disbelief, but Carrey is just on the mark and making every moment work. And then, but like, with that said, all of the comedy is still weighted by a great emotional center. This isn't a dramatic Carrey performance, but it is very heartfelt. When he needs to get to a point where he needs to be honest and genuine, he gets there all the way. Like there's a great moment where Carrey is starting to feel like overwhelmed by the prayers that he's receiving from everybody because he's God. And he like does that great thing with Deer where he like, you know, he like puts his finger in his ear and he's like, why, I can't hear you, you know, like in that great comedic moment. And then he runs outside and suddenly he's in the mountains and God has brought him there. And it's just a moment where he's so genuinely just confused and nervous about this whole thing, about like being God. Like, what does that even mean? And God sort of has to talk him off the ledge, you know, in this really great moment. And it's a great sort of like dramatic primer, I would say. Well, maybe not the best dramatic primer. I'm going to get to that one a little bit later. But it's not the best dramatic primer, but it's a great like movie to show somebody when they want to see Carrey like two different sides of him. You know, they want to see the funny side, they want to see the dramatic side, but maybe none heightened to the point that it will literally like bust your gut or shatter your heart. Just like to me, it was one of those early Carrey films that I grew up with. My family owns it on DVD. I know so many lines by heart. It's also an iconic movie. Everybody knows Morgan Freeman as God. That like character is like iconic. Everybody knows it. And yeah, it's just a really beautiful, wonderful movie, and it is my number 5.
Yeah, Bruce Almighty is a comedy that I definitely watched quite a bit when I was a kid. It was so entertaining as a youth. The Steve Carell stuff was always like popping up in my memory.
Yeah.
I love that sequence so much. And yeah, I haven't seen it probably since I was a teenager. It's been a long time since I've watched Bruce Almighty, but I do remember really enjoying it when I was a kid. And I definitely have been wanting to rewatch it again. And now that you brought it up, now I just might have to rewatch it eventually. A lot sooner.
It holds up, dude. It holds up. It holds up.
I just love the pairing of him and Morgan Freeman. I think Morgan Freeman being cast as God is like so perfect and so meta and so great. And they knocked it out the park. It's a very funny movie. And going into my number 5, it's definitely one of his quote unquote dramatic performances. Not entirely serious, but definitely more serious than Bruce Almighty. My number 5 is Man on the Moon, which I think is very underrated. I don't think a lot of people really talk about this movie as much as they should. Now, if anyone out there doesn't know what Man on the Moon is, it is the biopic about Andy Kaufman, the late comedian who got his rise when acting on the show Taxi in the 70s, 80s. Jim Carrey disappears into this role of Andy Kaufman. He's so great in the role. He really knocked it out of the park. My thing with this film that has always shocked me, and I'll get to the big thing about this movie later on, I was always shocked when I found out that this was directed by Milos Forman, the same guy who made One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and Amadeus. You would never guess that that 2-time Oscar winner of those movies, keep in mind, of those movies that aren't, you know, they're not funny movies at all, would direct something like a biopic about Andy Kaufman. Well, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest does have a comedic undertones to it. A shockingly dark,
they
funny
both
movie.
do. Amadeus is a hilarious. Tom Hulce's performance in Amadeus is hilarious.
It is, and that's another one that I haven't seen in a hot minute, and I need to rewatch it. I haven't seen that since I was like a teenager. I have to watch
one
that
of my
again.
all-timers. Amadeus is one of my all-timers.
I really need to give that one another watch. Like Milos Forman, what a great filmmaker, truly. Like a fantastic filmmaker. A lot of range in his work. But Man on the Moon, I mean, it tackles the time period very well. Carrey is great in it. He won a Golden Globe for this performance. The soundtrack is very good. I love REM's music. I love that they wrote some music for this movie. The Great Beyond is no pun intended. It's a great song. And I think all the performances around Jim Carrey are great. Danny DeVito is great, which is crazy that he was in this because he worked with Andy Kaufman. So this was a very personal movie for him to be in. I think Courtney Love was awesome as the love interest. And Paul Giamatti also did a great job too. He's a very underrated actor. Like he's definitely an actor who I would love to do an episode on down the road. He's one of those fantastic character actors, and he could pretty much do anything. Comedy, drama, he's done it all. I mean, Big Fat Liar is a masterpiece, everybody. I mean, come on. Like, come on.
Honestly, no cap, straight up, like mass. I love that movie a lot.
That
I
movie
love
is
Big.
fantastic. We
It's
could go.
honestly one of his best performances. Like, not
It
even like seriously,
is.
no cap.
It is. I'm so glad that you agree on that.
Fully commit to the camp, dude. Fully commit to the camp. I love it.
I can't believe that movie is 20 years old now. I can't believe it.
Oh my god!
I
Wow.
just childhood classic. Still love it to this day as an adult. It's just that's a great example of a great family early 2000s flick that, in my opinion, still holds up very well.
Absolutely.
Like, I'm shocked. But no, Man on the Moon is just a very endearing, wholesome biopic. It's very funny. It's very heartfelt. It's heartbreaking at times. Obviously, Andy Kaufman, we lost him very young, very tragically too. You could tell that there was a lot of talent in him. And if he were still around, I mean, who knows if he would still be working and everything, but he was a hell of a comedian. I watched so many clips of him after I saw the movie for the first time, and I was just really blown away. But obviously the big thing with Man on the Moon is that Jim Carrey went full on method for this film. He was on set and he was referred to as Andy. He didn't want to be called Jim. He went full Andy Kaufman. Once he walked onto the lot, he was Andy Kaufman. Once he left the set, he was Jim Carrey again. And this was talked about brilliantly in the really excellent documentary, Jim and Andy, which you guys could stream on Netflix. I had no idea that this happened. I had no idea this happened. And I remember seeing the trailer for this documentary. I'm like, wait a minute. He went full method for this movie. Oh my God. And, a lot of people were terrified of him. And you watch the footage, it's intense. It's definitely terrifying to the point where he disappeared. Like, he didn't have Jim Carrey in his head. He just had Andy Kaufman. And he had talked about how it took him forever to get out of that mindset when they finished making the movie. And it's an incredible performance, a performance that I feel should have been nominated for an Oscar. I think it's one of the best performances he's ever given. And you could comment on the method acting. If you're a fan of that, great. If not, you can have your own opinion. But I think it's one of the best performances he's ever given. I think it's a very lovely film. It's my number 5. Are you going to pass, or is this not on your list?
So Man on the Moon is not on my list. I do really like the film, though, a lot. It was one of the later films I watched from Carrey because I did not really have any interest in Andy Kaufman, like, as a comedian. And I sort of just let it sit for a long time. I knew he had gone full method on it, but it just sort of... There were a couple of Jim Carrey films that I sort of just let slide for a long time because I just didn't know. I was like, oh, I'll get to it eventually. And it's funny that you talk about the documentary, which I'm not going to get too deep into right now. But after watching the documentary, it finally convinced me to watch the movie. And so I gave the movie a shot, and I really, really enjoyed it. And I definitely agree with you that it's one of Jim Carrey's best performances in terms of his sheer commitment to embodying Kaufman. And, as much as I do love his performances and his 90s work, there is something untouchable about what he does here. And it's really one of the only films, I think it's certainly the only film that I can recall in which he plays a real person. It's like a biographical role.
Yeah. This is the only time, I think.
Yeah, and it really goes to show how much he admired Kaufman and how much he cared about his story, that for the one biographical role he ever did, to my knowledge, he went full on, and he really strived to make it as much their story as he could. And I think that just says a lot about who he is as an artist and what he values. So yeah, really great movie. It is a great lesson in Kaufman too. Like, it really gives you a great history into him and what he did as a performer. Yeah.
Milos. I'll be honest too. The me not being knowledgeable of Andy Kaufman, I didn't think that I was going to get that emotionally invested in it. So the funeral scene at the end, my God, and it has the clip of him singing, and they all sing along with him. Big
Yeah.
tears, honestly, like some of the biggest tears that I've ever had watching a scene from a movie.
The end of the movie is really maybe my favorite part. It's certainly the most memorable part of it for me. And it speaks a lot to Kaufman's legacy and his style and the many theories surrounding Kaufman not actually being dead and faking his death or whatever. I'm not going to get too deep into that, but I also just want to say I totally agree with you about what you said about Milos Forman. Incredible director, incredibly multifaceted and versatile. And this is just this is just another movie from him where it showcases just how much of a chameleon he was and his ability to tell, whatever story he needed to tell. Tragic that we lost him just a few years ago. Probably one of the most underrated filmmakers out there.
Yeah, and that's crazy to say considering he directed 2 Best Picture winners and he has 2 Best Director Oscars. It's nuts.
Yeah, I mean, awards do not always translate to cultural consciousness, unfortunately.
That's true. That's true. So now going into our number 4s, what is your pick?
So my number 4 is The Mask, which is a film that was my number 1 for a long, long time. This used to be This used to be like one of my all-time favorite films. This used to be one of my favorite Jim Carrey film. Things have changed since revisiting a number of films. And unfortunately, the one thing I will say about this movie is that it has not aged as well as I would have liked it to. In showing this movie to other people over the last several years, I find that a lot of people struggle to get into it because I do think that the story and some of the characters in the story and sort of the gender politics of it and some of the content of it is just it's very 90s. It's very sort of cheesy, hard to really get into. And so for that reason, I do feel like it has not aged as well as some of his other films. That being said, this film still rocks and it still has one of my favorite Jim Carrey performances, probably the hardest that Jim Carrey goes in terms of physical comedy. I think this is probably the top for me. I understand that some people may disagree. Some people may think it's Dumb and Dumber, which I totally hear. That film is also very physical. But I think that this, in combination with the visual effects, it's like this is like peak Carrey physical comedy. Like this is a performance where Carrey fully commits to the character of the mask. And while there is a lot of visual effects work, I think that visual effects work only serves to just sort of heighten Carrey's own comedic abilities. I think like you watch a lot of the behind the scenes work and Jim Carrey is still giving a lot of that flexibility, elasticity, the dancing, all of this crazy stuff, right? Like he is still very much in this movie and the visual effects only serve to heighten it, give the character even more dramatic, more of a dramatic sensibility. It's just iconic. It's just hilarious. Like it's party time, PART. Why? Because I gotta. Like that's just like lines. Like you can't. Nobody else can say those lines anymore. It's like only Jim Carrey can say that line and make it work these days. And it is again, it's a full commitment to the concept. It's also just a very entertaining movie. Like it's got very, fun characters beyond just Jim Carrey's character. Cameron Diaz's character, I think maybe, some people find it difficult to get into the movie because her character is basically treated like an object in the very beginning, at least. But the movie does sort of turn the tables in terms of like, what like a strong female character is in the movie and like sort of plays on archetypes a little bit. For those of you who have seen the movie, there are really 2 major female characters in the film, and one of them is assumed to sort of just be the ditzy, femme, and the other one is shown to be the more nicer character, the nicer, more humbler, down to earth character. And things just aren't really like that at all. Like they really just sort of flip around and it's a movie that really, I think when you go deeper down into the the themes of it, which again, this is one of those movies where like I don't think that the themes are so on its mind. They're so prevalent. But if you were to give it the time and you really think about it, this is really a movie about like identity. It's a movie about identity. It's a movie about the person we wish to be versus the person who we are, which is going to tie into a lot of my discussion about Jim Carrey when we get closer to the top of the list. It is a movie about a person who feels stuck in himself, who wants to be something more, who strives to, who when let loose is this like crazy animalistic, passionate, romantic lover, who also happens to have superhuman abilities. And like there is something about that is a heightened version of what a lot of these characters struggle with, which is like they pretend to be something that they are not, or they strive to be something bigger than they are. And it feels like the society around them makes that really hard. It makes it really difficult to get where they want to get. And I think there's a lot to say about The Mask itself as a plot device being a tool to show what somebody wishes to be, like a heightened version of what they want to be. And I think that, I'm not asking for this. But should they want to make more movies about the mask itself, about the character, I think there's a whole load of stories that can be told with this plot device. And I just think that, so many of these Jim Carrey comedies have a lot more depth in the storytelling than I think a lot of people give them credit for, which is why I think a lot of them hold up a lot better than most other comedies of this era. And yeah, I mean, there's so little I can say that hasn't already been said. The visual effects are incredible. The comedy is top notch. It's an adventure from start to finish. Milo is the most adorable dog on the planet. It's just a great time all around.
Yeah, The Mask is one of those comedies that, I'll be really honest, I haven't watched it in a long time, but I do remember, honestly, when I was a kid, I wasn't really a big fan of The Mask. I don't know what it was. It really didn't do much for me when I was a kid. When I became
it is a scary movie too for kids.
It did freak me out. I will be honest. But then when I got older, I watched it again and I laughed. It's probably my least favorite of the Jim Carrey comedies that came out that year because we had 3 that came out that year. I know it's disappointing because I know it's sad to name that.
There's a lot of competition. There's a lot of competition.
It's just the 3 comedies that came out that year that basically launched his film career they're all really funny in their own way. So, and they're all so different from each other when it comes to the performances that he brings to each of them. So The Mask is a fun time. It's a really, really good time. I remember one time I was talking about, not The Mask, but Mask with Eric Stoltz with someone. And they're like, oh, that Jim Carrey movie. And I said, no, that's The Mask. The one I'm talking about is Mask.
Yeah, easy mistake.
Easy mistake. Truly different movies. So going into my number 4 is my first straight up comedy to talk about on this list. My number 4 is Liar Liar, which I have to tell you, like the way you were kind of talking about The Mask and how there's a lot more depth to it than the common moviegoer would think. There's a lot of depth to Liar Liar as well. Now, Liar Liar is one of those comedies that still to this day is a massive thumbs up for me. This is one of the funniest films I think I may have ever seen. And we don't get studio comedies like this really anymore. So with Liar Liar, Jim Carrey plays Fletcher. He is a lawyer that's very great at his job. Like he is a top tier lawyer. He's great at his job. He lies to basically win these cases, like which makes him a great lawyer. But the thing about Fletcher is that because he's a massive workaholic, it kind of ruined his relationship with his family. But he loves his son so much. And you could see that he loves his kid so much. And he wants to be the great father that he deserves. But he's so committed to work. He lies constantly to his son, his adorable little son, who looks like the kid from Marriage Story. He looks exactly like the kid from Marriage Story. I'm not going to lie. And the cut, the haircut
so
is,
damn.
He looks exactly like him. It's kind of, I may not be the only one that thinks that. And if I am, maybe I am. I don't know.
Fun fact, kid from Liar Liar, voice of Tarzan, young Tarzan.
Oh, Oh
I
my God,
believe
that's
I
great.
believe that is the same guy, the same kid.
Tarzan, what an underrated Disney gem, truly. A film that
Truly.
nobody talks about Tarzan. It's so sickening. But going back to Liar Liar, because his son sees that he lies, he makes a wish saying, I wish just for one day, my dad can't lie. And as soon as the moment it kicks in, just wasn't that great. I've had better. I've had better.
Oh, oh,
So many great
iconic
lines.
moment. Dude,
What's Hayden? Your cholesterol.
incredible moment.
Your cholesterol.
Oh my, oh dude,
Oh my
you
God.
can't get me, you can't get me started. You can't get me started. You're
As
gonna,
soon as
this
he
whole
walks out,
podcast is just gonna be
one of the best. As soon as he walks out of the elevator, it was me. Pen is blue.
Oh my God, I just wanna bounce those things like Sugar Ray Leonard.
I just want to bounce those things like Sugar Ray Leonard. Oh, just the energy that he puts in this role is just so great. It's a really genuinely great comedy, and I like that. It's very heartfelt, like a lot of these '90s comedies are. They start off as straight up funny, but then of course they incorporate the heartfelt moments throughout. And I just think that this character is such a well-written character. Like I said, he loves his son so much and he wants to be the great father, but deep down he's like, I can't. The only way I'm good at my job is if I lie. Like, that's the only way I'm good at my job. And again, it gives me some of the biggest laughs ever. So one of the best comedies I think I've ever seen. And I could watch this over and over again. Never gets boring, never gets dull. Love, love, love Liar Liar. So are you going to pass, or is this not on your list?
I'm going to have to pass on.
Oh, I'm so excited to see where it is on your list. So now going into our number threes, what do you have?
So my number 3 is kind of going back to pseudo dramatic. I guess it is dramatic. This is more of a dramatic film, but my number 3 is The Truman Show, which has slowly become one of my all-time favorite movies, to be honest. I revisited it very recently, just out of this bizarre craving to watch it. Can't explain to you why, but I was like, you know what movie I'd really like to watch right now? The Truman Show. It was a movie that I first really rediscovered in the middle of the pandemic, really right in the beginning of the pandemic. I revisited it, and I was, oh my God, I was like shaken by it. I was really floored by it. This is a movie that has aged like the finest wine that you can buy. It is a to go like fully in on why this movie has aged so well could require its own podcast. Like,
yeah,
this is
absolutely.
a movie.
Absolutely.
Like when you think about the way in which reality television has exploded in media, when you think about how much the government surveillance state has become more of a hot topic in
this movie
politics.
Is ahead of its time. It's ahead of its time.
Saying that this movie is ahead of its time is like saying that like the sky is blue. Like, it's like, yeah, but like, why is the sky? It's like,
why?
Yeah, like, yeah, like you could like, yeah, the sky is blue, but have you ever thought about why the sky is so blue? Like that's like that's how I think about it. Like, it is a movie that is ridiculously ahead of its time, but like but that's the thing, it has nothing to say about all of those things. It is like, it has nothing to say about a lot of those larger ideas. Like, this movie is so incredible in that, yes, it is about all those things, but the movie is only focused on the story of its own character. It really does not give that much of a commentary on the world around them. It's really not like it's not a soapboxy piece, really, when I watch it. It is about this one character and his journey. It is like a part of this is obviously because I don't know if I don't know if all of this was really on his mind at the time that he made it. I'm not sure if they just were like, let's make a really interesting high concept movie and do it. Like, that could have very well easily been the case. I have done a little bit of research into the film, but that was more into Carrey and less so the writing process. The original script for The Truman Show was much darker, and it ended up getting a big rewrite. But obviously this movie was made before a lot of this stuff became more prevalent. So obviously, it being not as soapboxy as it could have been, it was just because it's a product of the time it came out. But I think that's one of the reasons it has aged so well, maybe because it did not have as much of a knowledge of how much it would age well. But when you watch this movie, it is so committed to its high concept. It's really about Truman and Christoph and the construct that has been created, and about what happens when your whole life is proven to be an illusion. I find that this movie and The Matrix surprisingly go really well together in terms of a lot of the themes and ideas surrounding them. They're both science fiction, even though Truman Show is more suburban sci-fi than Matrix. But this is just a movie that speaks very deeply to a lot of like things that I care about a lot. I'll get into why this movie is particularly insightful about Carrey later. But this is really, it's a movie about identity, obviously, but it is about like performance. It's really about like what happens when we have the realization that we are more molded by the society around us than we mold ourselves. And while the film obviously comes to the conclusion that you have to be your own person, Truman escapes the construct and decides to create his own life for himself. But the movie does really force you to ponder these really deep questions, like what happens when you realize watched your entire life and that more people know about you, and like when you realize that like your privacy is completely gone. Like what happens when you realize that you really have had no privacy, when the entire world knows about who you are, but more deeply when the beliefs about yourself, what you have thought to be yourself, are completely fabricated, were created by somebody else. And it's like it's an extension of what, in my opinion, is just basic philosophy. Like this is all stuff that is like, if you really go down and deep into philosophy, you'll realize that this is on a lot of philosophers' mind, this idea of like the inner self versus how we are defined by other people. I'm going down a bit of a rabbit hole already, but like all of these things are so present in this movie, but it manages to be wrapped up in this incredibly entertaining, incredibly funny. This is a funny movie, but also in times incredibly dark and heartfelt. I always come back to that scene where, or really it's more of a beat, where Laura Linney's character is doing that Cocoa ad in front of him during this incredibly like vulnerable moment. It's like, why don't I get you some coffee? Like a cocoa bean straight from the islands of wherever. And he goes like,
who are you talking to?
What are you talking about? Yeah. What are you talking about? Who are you talking to? It's like, it's one of the most like, it's one of the few moments in this movie where it feels like Carrey gets to let loose a little bit.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Tell me what's happening.
Yeah, seriously, when he's in the car and it's like, look, no cars. Like it's I think a lot of people do not give Carrey credit, and the directors that work with him, in that when he needs to restrain himself, he absolutely will. But when he gets those moments to let loose, he will just give it his all. Perfect deliveries, perfect commitment to the comedy. Oh man, like I keep thinking about the scene where he's on the sailboat at the end and it's just like screaming like, what do you do with a drunken sailor? Like just out there. And Christoph is like losing his grip on everything. It is one of the best high concept movies of all time. It has aged incredibly. It's a movie that I feel like just perfectly commits to its own concept. And it also just really has every corner of its world building thought out, to the point where I'm really not questioning a thing. The third act does get a little bit, I feel like the third act is a little rushed, which like only on this viewing, I'd have to go back and watch it again if I really wanted to solidify that thought. But I don't really give a shit, because this movie is just so beautiful and it reminds me of the wonder of movies and what movies can be, that it doesn't even matter. There's just God, I could write a whole essay. I could do 5 podcast episodes about all the things that the Truman Show is just brings out from within me.
Yeah.
And I will tell you that it's going to be really hard to top these next 2, but I can imagine over the years this could become my number 1 all-time favorite Jim Carrey film.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to pass on this one. I'm gonna pass on this one. Alrighty then.
We love to hear it.
Yeah.
We love to hear it. We love to hear it.
Number 3 for me, I'm gonna have to go with my favorite straight-up comedy from him. My favorite Jim Carrey comedy, Dumb and Dumber. One of the great buddy comedies, one of the great road trip movies. This is another movie that you could honestly do a whole podcast on, just talking about the quotes, the comedy. I love these characters. Jim Carrey and Jeff Daniels together are like peanut butter and jelly. They are a great pairing together. Like, they work off each other so beautifully, so terrifically. Their chemistry is one of my favorite on-screen parents of all time. When you watch this film and then you see the other line of work that both of these actors do, and you realize that, yeah, Jim Carrey obviously primarily does comedy, but Jeff Daniels, you see him in something like The Newsroom, where he's speaking Aaron Sorkin dialogue. And then you see him in something like Dumb and Dumber, and you're like, how is this the same actor? Like, you wouldn't even put 2 and 2 together. It's crazy to me. But yeah, this film is so much fun. It's so entertaining. It's what you look for in a comedy. There's so many laughs throughout Dumb and Dumber. Now, the basic premise, it's nothing extravagant, of course. So Harry and Lloyd, the 2 best friends that live in the New England suburban area, which is where all of a lot of the Farrelly Brothers films are set. They're set in that area. And they come across this suitcase that is accidentally left by Mary Swanson, but they call her Mary Samsonite, which is hilarious. That's a funny joke throughout the movie. And they decide to go all the way to Vespa, right? Wait, where is that? Where they're going? Aspen. That's where they're going. Aspen. I don't know why I said Vespa.
They go to Aspen on a Vespa.
Yes.
On a Vespa at one point.
On a Vespa, yes. I really think that this comedy has some of the best lines ever, and a lot of Jim Carrey's lines are just delivered so perfectly. Hey, I guess they're right. Senior citizens, although slow and dangerous behind the wheel, can still serve a purpose. I'll be right back. Don't you go dying on me. Like, just great stuff, truly. Where's the booze? I got robbed by a sweet old lady in a motorized cart, and I didn't even see it coming. Like, just great stuff. The run, the iconic run where he just runs like this, like his arms are up like that. I swear this movie just gives me the laughs that I always love. And Jim's performance as Lloyd is just so perfect. It's literally one of the best comedy performances I've ever seen. And there's so many memorable moments. There's quite a bit of heartfelt moments throughout the movie. You love their friendship. You love these characters. You love going on this adventure with them. You're like, oh my God, when they get into dumb shenanigans, when he drives off the road and they're like 1,000 miles away from the location. And Harry is just sitting in the dirt, and then you see a little bit of his butt, and then he just freaks out. Oh my God, it's so great. Stop being a baby. So we backtrack a tad. Like, just freaks out. Just again, the comedic timing. Mutt's Cut,
bringing back good memories, man.
The Mutt's Cut van, great piece of transportation in cinema. Oh my God, I mean, there's just so many memorable moments and so many improvised moments. The sequence where they're right outside the convenience store, he's like, "Oh, hey, big gulps, huh? Well, see you later." Like, just all improvised. I love Dumb and Dumber. It's a very entertaining film, and I have to be really upfront. When I was a kid and I watched this a lot, I didn't even think about this moment throughout the movie. But when I rewatched it I would say probably right before the sequel came out, there was a moment in the apartment between the 2 of them where it actually kind of got really serious. And Lloyd was talking about how he's sick and tired of not having anybody. And it honestly really makes me tear up, like, just thinking about that, because, like, you watch that scene on its own and you don't even put it together that that's from a comedy movie. And it's actually one of the best acted scenes in Jim Carrey's career, like straight up. It's a really touching, very honestly, really devastating moment that feels kind of relevant. Like when I watched this movie again for the first, like right when the pandemic started, I watched this movie again. And like that moment just felt so pivotal at that point where I was at in my life right now, like my mindset at that point. And I love Dumb and Dumber, one of my favorite comedies ever, similar to Liar Liar, one that I've loved since I was a kid. I've watched it countless amount of times throughout my life, and it will never get old for me. It's crazy that this movie's almost 30 years old. It's insane that a comedy like this holds up pretty well, in my opinion. And yeah, I mean, what can you say about Dumb and Dumber that hasn't been said already? It's one of the best comedies from the 90s. It's a comedy classic. I know there are a lot of people out there that don't like Dumb and Dumber. I know there are a lot of people out there that don't like the Farrelly brothers, and that's fine. You're allowed to have your opinion. But for me personally, Dumb and Dumber is one of the funniest movies I have ever seen in my life.
So Dumb and Dumber is not on my list. And to be honest with you, I've always found Dumb and Dumber to be a little overrated. Not to say that it's a great film. I enjoy it. It's a great comedy. But, I think part of this is the Farrelly brothers. I really have never quite been a fan of the Farrelly brothers and their style. And there are just a couple of moments here that the comedy in some of these moments doesn't really hit as hard for me as something like a Mask or my next pick, my number 2 pick, which I'll talk about in a second. So I'm not going to go too deep into it, but I will say that I do absolutely agree with you on that moment with Lloyd, that dramatic moment with Lloyd, which is devastating after that whole movie that you've just sat through, of all the comedy that you've sat through. And while I don't particularly love this movie as much as his other movies, I will give Jim Carrey the credit, and as well as Jeff Daniels the credit, that they are, as silly as the performances are, they are really 2 masterful transformations into the characters that we see in the film. And I think that Jeff Daniels, honestly, Jeff Daniels feels like more of an MVP in the movie than Jim Carrey is.
Oh, yeah.
Jeff Daniels is really just getting deep in the weeds of it.
Oh, yeah, the laxative scene, the sequence at the gas station where his foot's on fire. He's like, for God's sakes, just give me the damn number.
Yeah. Quotable line after quotable. Again, a whole podcast. Just the lines. just repeating all of our quotable lines. Like, I've been trying to restrain myself, but for my number 2 pick, I might have to go all out. Yeah. We'll see.
And then the last quote that I'll say, what are you doing, Lloyd? It feels like we're running at an incredible rate, Harry. Quit it. We're not even through Connecticut yet, and you're already annoying me. Oh my God. But now going away from Dumb and Dumber and quoting constantly, going into our number 2 picks, what is your second favorite Jim Carrey film of all time?
I'll just do one more. My favorite quote from Dumb and Dumber is when he says, "So you're saying there's a chance?"
There's a chance.
That's my favorite.
I love it.
My number 2 favorite is a movie that I passed on earlier, and that is Liar Liar, which is my favorite Jim Carrey straight up comedy. God, you can't even, every freaking line. I love the moment where, I'll just go through a few. I love, like, it's like, you want to play catch? Yeah, sounds great. Yeah, thanks, Dad. Thanks, son. And then when he does, like, did you see that? Did you see that? He struck him. And then also oh God, what is it? When, of course, the claw, iconic comedic bit there. When he like when Jim Carrey in Liar Liar is, in my opinion, at the height of his comedic abilities. This is prime Jim Carrey physical comedy. There are sequences in other movies that come close, but when Jim Carrey goes crazy over not being able to lie, he just fully extends himself to this concept. It's the most committed he is to any concept he's ever done in his career. There's a great moment in the courtroom where it's like, Judge, I need a continuance. Why would I give you a continuance? Because I really, really want a continuance. Like, just a brilliant thing after he beats himself up in the bathroom and he comes back to the courtroom and goes like, who did this to you? A madman, sir. A madman at the end of his rope. Incredible. Absolutely incredible. When he's convincing oh god, what's her name? The actress who plays the blonde.
Oh, Jennifer Tilly.
Jennifer Tilly, thank you. When he's explained to Jennifer Tilly's character the strength of her case, and he's like, there is no such thing as the weaker sex. Like, great line there. When his kid wakes up on his birthday, he goes, okay, cancel the dancing girls. Oh man, I could go on and on and on. This is I talked about this movie on a podcast recently called the Film Nuts Podcast with a good friend of mine, Taylor D. Adams, another great film podcast that you all should be listening to. I talked about Liar Liar on this show, and I'll sort of repeat a lot of my thoughts that I said on that show, which is that I agree with you in that there is a lot of depth to this movie that I don't think a lot of people give it credit for. I think this is a story about lying. This is a movie about what it means to lie and the different levels of severity of lying. There's that great scene in the middle of the movie where he's talking to his son, Fletcher's talking to his son, and he talks about the like different levels of severity in lying. You know, like I can lie. I had to lie to your mom because I didn't want to tell her that she was fat, whatever. And it's like a funny moment. And you're like, oh yeah, right, that's kind of true. And then at the end of that scene, you know, he says like, no, you don't understand. I have to lie. And like, you know, mommy lies. Even the great Jerry lies. And he goes, but you're the only one that makes me feel bad. And it's like, like right in the heart. Just like, oh, just like literally like twisting the knife. And that scene is so pivotal to this entire movie. It's really a movie about it's a movie about your family, about, you know, being grateful and treating your family with respect and being respectful of other people, but it is not a movie that is against lying. That is the thing. I don't think this movie is anti-lying. I think that this movie is, I mean, you could say it's anti-lying to a certain extent, but I don't think that's really what the movie's about. I think that the movie understands that there's a level, there are different levels to lying. I mean, the whole movie's climax is like centered around a lie. Like he basically says that this lie grants him the ability to win in court. You know, so like if in truth, literally in truth, by Fletcher's character telling the truth in the courtroom, he wins the case and the lie wins them the case, but guess what? He's debunked the lie and everything, but this horrible mother still gets to keep her children. Like, what does that say, right? So it's a movie with a lot more depth. It is Jim Carrey fully committing to the physical comedy of the thing. It is just the best physical comedy he's ever done. Just the way he fully extends himself. You know, Tom Shadyac, the director of this, and Bruce Almighty talked about how when they were making this movie, they sort of they designed Jim Carrey's character as like somebody with Tourette's, basically, which like don't love that sort of the political angle of that in 2022, but they designed him as a character with Tourette's, basically, who like the lying was like a part of that. Like he literally had to fight against the lying coming out of him. It's a perfect, absolutely hog wild. And it's just a fantastic movie, fantastic performance from him, iconic line after iconic line, and my personal all-time favorite Jim Carrey comedy.
Yeah, it's so good, man. It's so good, and I'm really glad that we both had it on our list. And now my number 2 is a film I passed on as well. My number 2 is The Truman Show, which honestly is one of the best films I've ever seen. I think this has one of the best screenplays ever written. How this did not win the Oscar is baffling to me. On a few weeks ago, we talked about Tom Hanks, and we talked about how crazy it was that Saving Private Ryan lost Best Picture to Shakespeare in Love, and how that's still regarded as one of the biggest Oscar upsets, not just of the past 20, 25 years, but just probably one of the biggest Oscar upsets since the Oscars started almost 100 years ago. Everyone still talks about that to this day. And I think two big Oscar upsets is actually three regarding this film. Number one, how this did not win Best Original Screenplay. Number two, how this was nominated for Best Director, but not Best Picture. And the biggest for me, number three, how the hell, and I mean this clearly, how the hell did Jim Carrey not get nominated for this? You listen. I love Ed Harris, great man. I saw him in person at the New York Film Festival when I saw The Lost Daughter. That man sat 10 feet away from me, and he's a great actor. Yep. I respect him so much. And he was awesome in this movie, as is everybody else. But how was he nominated and not Jim Carrey? How do you not nominate the titular character of this movie? That performance is arguably one of the best performances, one of the best goddamn performances I have ever seen in my life. Like you said, for a lot of the movie, he kind of restrains himself. He's hilarious throughout the movie, of course, but the sequences where he's allowed to explode, he has to hold that in for a lot of the movie. And prior to this coming out, pretty much all the movies he had acted in, he was exploding in throughout, giving all the wild energy, all the crazy movements, what have you. And this was really the first time that a lot of people saw Jim Carrey in the way where he had to kind of cool himself down, take it back a notch. Right. And then he was able to release all of that and certain parts throughout the movie, especially at that halfway point where he says, to Laura Linney's character, "What are you saying? Who are you talking to? Tell me what's happening." Just great stuff, all around.
Who are you talking to?
Yeah, who are you talking? Just the way he just says it so subtly. He's like, "Who are you talking to? Who are you? What? Yeah, it's great." And honestly, too, it's one of the, I would say, one of the more mature PG-rated movies I think I've seen, to where it's not necessarily for kids. Absolutely. Kids aren't necessarily going to be they're going to be a little thrown off by it, but it's, I just think that this movie is one of the all-time greats, and it's slowly risen up as one of my favorite films of all time. Each and every viewing, it gets better and better and better. You notice something every time you watch this movie. You look at all these essays, you watch all these videos about this movie. Like we talked about before, this movie is ridiculously ahead of its time. And I don't know what Peter Weir was, thinking about at the time when this movie was being made, but it really is a game changer. And it's one of those films that really makes you think a lot. And it just has one of the coolest premises ever. It's just such an original concept. And it's one that easily could have been stupid. This easily could have flopped. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But it works because of how it's written and directed and acted and put together. The imagery is great. I really like how at this year's Cannes Film Festival, they used the last shot from this movie as the poster for the film festival. I thought that was really, really cool.
Oh, I heard about that.
Yeah, I thought that was really, really cool. It would have been so cool to go in person to the festival and just see, it said 2022 Cannes Film Festival, and it's just Jim Carrey walking up those stairs. I that's so cool. And, so many quotable lines, iconic lines. In case I don't see you, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. Just one of the most iconic lines in film. Again, how this didn't win any Oscars, beyond baffling to me. And I was born in 98. I would definitely say this was the best film that came out that year, which is shocking because I love Saving Private Ryan. That's a great movie. And there were many other great movies that came out that year. But again, just briefly talking about the Oscars, and we don't have to go into this topic for too long, but really, it's just so shocking that out of all the movies to pick from 1998, and I haven't seen this movie, so I'm not going to judge it because I don't like to judge movies I haven't seen. But how do you pick Shakespeare in Love over Saving Private Ryan The Truman Show, and even all the other movies that got nominated that year. I think The Thin Red Line was nominated that year, and I haven't seen that. But like, it's
Great
just
movie.
shocking to me. Like again, and you nominate the director, but you don't nominate the film itself, and you don't even nominate the lead actor. Like, I don't know who won the Oscar that year. I'm sure the performance was great, but Jim Carrey should have won the Oscar for this. And I love his speech when he won the Golden Globe for this because he won in the dramatic category. He's like, me, dramatic actor?
Right.
I think everyone's mistaken. Like, I think that's funny that he was able to like subtly acknowledge that. But no, The Truman Show is a masterpiece. Truly one of the best films ever made. Never gets old. Way ahead of its time. Still pretty pivotal to today. And it's just one of those films that's so inspiring. Like, as someone who went to film school, it like really inspired me a lot. And it made me want to tell stories for a while. That's not necessarily what I want to do anymore. But at the time, I'm really glad I watched this when I did. And I'm still very appreciative of how much of an impact this movie has left on me as a film fan and as someone who went to film school and studied filmmaking. The Truman Show is really sublime. It's one of those films that is going to keep getting talked about many years down the road. I really think this is also I think this is a perfect candidate for Criterion. Like a Criterion for this, that would be a day one buy for me.
Oh,
absolutely,
100%.
Like if you want to think of a perfect candidate for the Criterion collection, this is one of them, hands down.
It would be one of their more mainstream picks, but it totally deserves to be.
It would be a very deserving entry in the collection, which already has so many great films in there. And yeah, like it would definitely be one of the more mainstream Criterion films. And their whole point isn't necessarily to just put out big, high-profile stuff, but when they do put high-profile stuff out, most of the time they're really good picks. Like they're really good picks. I must say so myself.
No, absolutely.
So now going into our number ones, I feel like we have the same number one, unless you're pulling the surprise one and you put The Incredible Burt Wonderstone at number one. But, we'll have to see where this goes, or the number 23. I wouldn't be surprised if you put that on there. So so number one Jim Carrey film of all time for Larry. What is it?
So I'm actually pulling a bit of a surprise pick and a slight cheat, but I think you'll understand why I'm doing this.
Okay.
So my number one favorite Jim Carrey film is Jim and Andy, The Great Beyond, which is the documentary directed by, now I'm forgetting the guy's name. The guy who directed Fire, the Netflix Fire Festival documentary.
Oh, God. Let me look up his name right now while you talk about him. Let me look it up for you.
Yeah, please find his name because he's a goddamn genius. This movie really changed the way that I saw Jim Carrey and totally recontextualized all the things that I knew about him, all the movies he's done, everything. Like, it is will completely change your perception on this guy, for better or for worse, depending on, how you see him and view him.
Yeah, his name is Chris Smith.
Chris Smith. That's it. I couldn't remember his name because he has one of the most basic names on the planet. But yes, Chris Smith. Chris Smith, he directed the Fire documentary for Netflix. Really talented director. So sort of the thing I've been building up to throughout this entire conversation is that Jim and Andy, in my view, puts Jim Carrey's entire filmography in conversation with each other, like each of the individual films. It's a movie that, like, obviously is most concerned with Man on the Moon, which, for those who don't know, Jim and Andy documentary has a lot of archival footage of his time at Man on the Moon and basically goes into all the method acting he did on that movie. But it also inserts his other movies in there and gives you a lot of context into how those movies were memorable for him and important for him. It talks about the Truman Show especially, and really puts the Truman Show fully in context with Jim Carrey and his career and who he was at that time. It talks about a little bit about The Mask, Eternal Sunshine, Ace Ventura briefly. It just completely redefines this guy. I think a lot of us think of Jim Carrey still to this day as just a comedic machine, a fun comedian, a little bit, bonkers in a certain way, but like, one of the best comedians of all time, a truly beloved figure. But this guy, his outlook on life, I think, is something that a lot of people mock. It's something that makes a lot of headlines and buzz, and it's controversial in a number of ways. But I can't fully subscribe to it. But there's something so fascinating about it. This theory he has about like how there's the soul and the self, and like you are a character that you create through yourself, and ultimately that is still a mirage. It is not fully you. That we're all souls, and we pick, and like we're all like we pick bodies to inhabit, and that's not really who you are. The soul is who you are, and ultimately you're creating artifice for yourself. I think it's something that people mock, but in the current age of social media and everybody being more present online than they are offline, I think it holds up extremely well. Like in the age in which Bo Burnham can make the film Inside, which speaks so directly to our moment, Jim Carrey was sort of talking about a lot of the same stuff earlier. And I think a lot of people should give it some more credence. They see his red carpet interviews, and they hear that he came out as anti-vax at one point, and suddenly it's like, oh, he's just crazy. But in reality, he has a much deeper understanding of himself and who he is than I think a lot of other people. He is a person who created a version of himself, this comedic machine persona of himself for other people to free them of concern. That's like his whole thing. Like he wanted to be the guy who can free people of concern. And that's just who we think Jim Carrey is now. And so suddenly when he gives these dramatic performances, we're like, oh, who is this person? But in reality, this is a man who is deeply in touch with his own spirituality, with his own sense of self, with his own heartbreak, with his own journey. And it's fascinating to see how he talks about The Truman Show in particular, because The Truman Show is all about literally a man in a bubble. And that's exactly what he felt like during this movie. He felt like he would hit this peak of celebrity. When he was paid for The Mask, it was the most a celebrity had ever been paid to be in a movie before, like $20 million at that point in like 1997 or 1996 when he started, which was crazy, huge, like huge peak. And he talks about how he felt like he was everybody was projecting who they thought he was onto him, and he felt like he had to be this person for other people, and in fact it was distancing himself from who he really was himself, what he really wanted to be. And seeing all of this paired with Jim and Andy, which was a completely different experience for him, where he let himself and all of his artifice go for the sake of telling another man's story and inhabiting that man's life. There's just something so deeply powerful about it. And I understand that a lot of people, do not condone Jim Carrey's actions. They think that he went too far with the method acting. I totally understand where people are coming from. Again, I can't condone any of it. I can't condone, going to Steven Spielberg's production studios unannounced and trying to get an interview with him and haranguing his front office staff, to get an interview with him. I can't condone any of the dumb, crazy stuff that he did. But I have to admire it in a way from an outside perspective, seeing how far he went to shed his artifice to tell another story. And when he came back, he realized just how separate he was from himself. And to realize that he felt like he needed to do his own thing. And of course, we get movies that happened after Man on the Moon, which, he never really fully reclaimed his comedic crown after Man on the Moon, because I feel like he just sort of realized that he was trapping himself, and the society at large was trapping himself. And he went on to do so many fascinating films after that. I didn't talk about it on this show, but I Love You, Philip Morris is a thoroughly underrated Jim Carrey film that I really appreciate in a number of ways. Even movies that people don't love, like when he did The Number 23 with Joel Schumacher, or Dark Crimes. These are movies that like people will be like, what the heck is Jim Carrey doing in all these movies? But he was speaking to the roles that spoke to him. He was giving into those roles. And you talk about, all of these, even the movies as subtle as like The Mask. I was talking about this. The Mask is about becoming something bigger than who you really are. This mask transforms you into something. And for Jim Carrey, I feel like that mask was a symbol for like the fame and the fortune, like this huge career step. And it's just a movie that obviously is great on its own. It's a fascinating documentary on its own. The editing is great. All of the archival footage is used to incredible effect. The interview with Jim Carrey is incredible. It's one of the best interviews for a documentary I have ever watched. It is intimate. It is raw. It is human. It is just so much insight from him. I love his beard. One of the best beards I have ever seen in an interview in a documentary. It's incredible. But more importantly, it's a movie that really gave me more insight into Carrey and who he is and to all of his movies. It put it all into conversation. It all clicked in a certain way for me. And, that's why I think when we're talking about top 5 Jim Carrey films, if we're talking about being my favorite Jim Carrey film, it has to be Jim and Andy, because it is all of the Jim Carrey films in a certain way. It is like the crown jewel in Jim Carrey's crown. It's like a full dissection of who he is as a performer, as a comedian, all of the movies. And, I don't even love Man on the Moon as much as a lot of his other movies, but it gave me such a deeper appreciation for that film and a deeper appreciation for his entire filmography. So that has to be my number 1 pick.
Yeah, that definitely was a massive surprise. Honestly, we're only 3 episodes into this show. I don't know if there's ever going to be a bigger surprise on this show than you picking that as your number 1. You brought up very good points about that, because this really is the Jim Carrey movie, because it talks about him. Yeah. It talks about his movies. It doesn't just talk about the process of him transforming into Andy Kaufman. Yeah, that's like the crux of the movie. Like that's, it's called Jim and Andy, but it's really also about Jim Carrey at the same time. And it's, again, a really beautiful documentary. I think that if this had been handled better, like Netflix released the documentary, I think if it had been handled better through market and distribution, I honestly could have seen this maybe being nominated for Best Documentary Feature. That would have been a great nomination. When you think about documentaries about filmmaking and actors and everything, this is one of the best that has come out in a very long time. Like, they don't really nominate a lot of documentaries surrounding filmmaking in some sense. And this is one of those documentaries that really sticks out greatly. It's so great, so fantastic. And it shows you Jim Carrey in a way that you would never have thought of seeing him. And exactly, I'll be honest, I never really, obviously I've loved Jim Carrey my whole life, but when this documentary came out 5 years ago, I didn't know everything about him as a person. I never really looked into it. I was just watching his movies and, being entertained and moved by his performances. But just watching this gave me a different view of him and a positive view of him. Obviously, like Larry said, I don't necessarily condone the methods that he went towards when committing to playing Andy Kaufman, but just hearing about what his mind was like before, during, and especially after he shot the movie. I mean, that's what really got to me when I was watching the documentary, and he was talking about how, honestly, one of the moments that really moved me was when he was talking about when Andy Kaufman's, I think it was his sister, she came to the set. And he was, obviously in the Andy persona at that point. And oh my God, I mean, that shook me up. That really genuinely shook me up. Again, he went places that I would never have anticipated anyone going. And just hearing about how long it took for him to become Jim Carrey again, I mean, it really made me sad. It really broke my heart. When he was like, oh, it took forever to go back to being Jim Carrey. And that's this documentary really is worth checking out if anyone out there. If you're a fan of Jim Carrey and you haven't seen this documentary, you're doing yourself a huge disservice, honestly.
Absolutely. And it kind of ties into what I think your number 1 is, which I'm pretty confident I know what it is.
Yeah, my number one is a very cliche, generic pick when talking about Jim Carrey's films, but it really honestly is, in my opinion, the best acting he's ever done. I think it's the best film that he's ever been in. It's one of those films that, again, when you watch it, it leaves you thinking a lot, and it has you feeling different things. It makes you laugh. It makes you cry. It kind of makes you terrified, and it makes you really think a lot about yourself, relationships, the people that love you, the people that you love, and just so many things around you. My number one favorite Jim Carrey film is Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, directed by Michel Gondry, written by Charlie Kaufman, starring Jim Carrey and Kate Winslet, a pairing that I never thought would ever happen. I guarantee you, when this movie was first announced, however many years ago, and people were like, Jim Carrey and Kate Winslet, what a weird pairing, but okay, sure, why not? And
they're laughing now.
The premise, the basic premise of this is that Jim Carrey plays Joel Barrett. He's very quiet, reclusive. You know, he's a broken person. You could just see that he's very broken. And then he meets Clementine Krasinski, played by Kate Winslet. They start a relationship together. It's very sunshines and rainbows at first, and then all of a sudden it just ends. I'm not going to spoil anything regarding their relationship, but then the main thing about this movie is that she erases him from her memory, and then he realizes that he also wants to do that as well. But then as the movie progresses, he starts to realize he is not ready to let those memories go. And that's something that a lot of people think about. And I think it's something that everybody thinks about after a relationship ends, especially one that lasts a long time. And I'll be completely upfront. My last serious relationship, I rewatched this movie not too long after that relationship ended. And I'll be completely honest, like, there were parts of me that really wanted to end, like to remove all the memory of that relationship from my mindset, because it just left me feeling so broken and so lost and so, like, I was not happy, like, thinking about it deep down. That relationship just really put me down. But then there were days where I thought about, there were some good memories from that relationship. And just because you go through a bad relationship doesn't mean it's entirely a bad thing. It helps you prepare yourself for what's to come after that. And that's what I think happens with Joel throughout this movie, is that if he lets these memories go, it's not going to do anything better. It's just going to make it work. Like, you have to be emotionally prepared for what's to come. And I think that this concept, similar to The Truman Show, is so original and so unique and so fresh that it's another movie that kind of feels a little ahead of its time. I don't know if it's not as ahead of its time as The Truman Show, but it kind of leaves you feeling that way. Like, the premise is just so fascinating to me. And it's a movie that's able to balance comedy and drama. It's not as serious as people think it is, but it balances the two genres together. But then it's also like a romance movie. It's a sci-fi movie in some sense. Like, there's multiple genres incorporated into this one movie, and it doesn't feel cluttered. Like, when you put together many genres into one project, it can feel like a colossal mess. And this is the opposite of a colossal mess. The directing here is some of the best I've ever seen. Charlie Kaufman is one of the best writers ever. I've loved a lot of the stuff that he has written. This is my personal favorite screenplay that he's ever written. It won him the Academy Award. Very, very deserving win, I must say so myself. One of the best Oscar wins of the past 20 years, because there's no way that anything else could have beat this. Like, I think that Oscars, the screenplay categories, they gave it to two of the best movies that year. This one, original screenplay, and Sideways won best adapted screenplay. Two of my favorite films of all time. Like, great
choices, yeah.
Like, fantastic pieces of dialogue. Just like, if you're someone that wants to get into writing scripts, these are two very good scripts to, like, read over and watch the films and just analyze them and look into the process of how they were written. And I think Jim Carrey's performance is the best. This is the best acting I think he's ever done. Um, the it really didn't kick in for me until about 20 minutes into the movie where the title came in and they were playing that song from Beck and he's crying in the car. You don't know what's going on because he had just dropped off Clementine. Elijah Wood comes out of nowhere and says, "Can I help you with something?" He's like, "No." And then it just cuts. And then the Beck song slowly comes in. And then it just cuts to Joel crying in the car. And you're like, where did this come from? Like, what is going on? Beautifully edited. Like the editing choices made here are outstanding. I don't know what won best editing at the Oscars that year. I think this should have won best editing. Like the choice of editing that is made in this film is so perfect. And this movie just, again, it just leaves you thinking so much. And his chemistry with Kate Winslet is fantastic. At the time of this movie coming out, Jim Carrey had obviously done a few dramatic performances, but he was mostly known for doing comedy. And Kate Winslet had been doing a lot of period pieces, like she had done Sense and Sensibility, Titanic, Iris. She had really just done period pieces at that time. Like no one ever saw her in the film set in present day or a comedy, if you really think about it. And Kate Winslet is one of those actors that I think has really great comedic timing as well. And she knocks it out of the park in this film. She's fantastic as Clementine. Very well-written character, all the different hair colors. And I'll be honest, I was thrown off at first when I saw the movie. I was like, is this performance going to be really cheesy and corny and stupid and annoying?
Right.
But like, you get where the character's coming from, and they're both very flawed people. You get why she feels the way she feels. You get why he feels the way he feels. You understand why both of them feel the way they feel. But then as the movie progresses and you see more of their relationship, you see the different sides of their relationship, and you get a feel of how the relationship progressed and how it got better at points, it got worse at points. Like, it's a really great romance come to life. And honestly, there are times where it goes back and forth for me as my favorite romance on screen. I go back and forth with this, and the Before trilogy is my favorite romance told on film. Like it's another cliche pick, but it's like it's the two of them that go back and forth. But I love Eternal Sunshine so much. One of the best films ever made. Jim Carrey should have been nominated for Best Actor for this. Honestly, I'm going to be upfront. I would have given him the Best Actor Oscar for this. Like, you look at all the performances that came out in 2004, and there were so many great performances from that year. You had Jim Carrey in this. You had Paul Giamatti in Sideways. And another performance that should have been nominated for an Oscar. How he wasn't nominated is ridiculous, in my opinion. But, and I liked all the nominees from that year. I was a fan of Jamie Foxx and Ray. That was a very good performance, but Jim Carrey in Eternal Sunshine was the best lead actor performance that year that I saw, at least. This movie just makes me feel so many different things. It's very inspiring for me also, like similar to The Truman Show, as a guy who loves watching films and talking about them. And I really don't know why this is also not in the Criterion Collection. This is another film that would be perfect for the collection.
This is a better fit for Criterion than Truman Show.
I agree. I was going to say that next. This is a better fit for the Criterion Collection than the Truman Show. They're coming out with a 4K at some point this year, which I'm very excited about. I can't wait to buy that.
Oh, that's awesome. Cannot wait for that.
I'm so excited for that. But Eternal Sunshine, The Spotless Mind, love it so much. My favorite Jim Carrey film of all time, for sure.
Yeah, I do think that this is a masterful film. I don't rank it in my top 5 because I literally struggle to revisit this film. Like, this is a film that is so dramatically potent for me that I have trouble watching it sometimes.
It's a difficult watch. It's a really difficult watch.
Yeah, it is so deeply tapped into a very specific kind of heartbreak. And I think when I'm going to tie this back to Jim and Andy for his documentary, Jim and Andy. They do briefly talk about Eternal Sunshine, and he talks about how Jim Carrey was still sort of, getting over his Man on the Moon transformation, and he also had gone through a difficult romantic relationship. And Michelle Gondry was like, "Oh, you're so broken. Like, please don't
Yeah.
get well." He
Yeah.
literally says, "Please don't get well."
He
And
was so broken. He was so broken.
yeah, please don't get well. And like that is so deeply troubling in so many ways. Again, this whole idea of method. Honestly, that may be more troubling than a lot of the method acting Jim Carrey did for Men on the Moon. But in a way, it was perfect because Jim Carrey was able to tap into that very brokenness, that very heartbreak that this movie centers on. Incredible ensemble: Kirsten Dunst, Mark Ruffalo, David Cross, Elijah Wood. Um, Incredible extra ensemble supporting them. Some of the best visualizations of these sort of feelings that I've seen in a movie. Some great camera work and transitions.
Fantastic camera work. Underappreciated cinematography.
Absolutely. Yeah, the scene on the beach is just like
Oh my God.
iconic to me.
And then of course the iconic scene where they're laying on the ice at nighttime.
Yeah. And I will give it to you this. Like a lot of the movies I've talked about, the filmmaking I haven't talked a lot about the filmmaking because we've been focusing so much on Carrey. But so many of these films that we've talked about have such great filmmaking. The Truman Show, cinematography in that movie is great. Jim and Andy, the editing is masterful. Here, this is probably the best filmmaking that Jim Carrey has ever been accompanied with in terms of as a performer.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's just very little I can say. It is a very difficult movie for me. And, one of my friends recently told me he had never seen it, which has inspired me to potentially revisit it. But even then, it's very much like I have to be ready. I have to be sort of in a mood for it because it's
absolutely.
It's an absolute wrecking ball emotionally.
Absolutely. The last time I checked this out, I immediately put on Dumb and Dumber afterwards because I had to laugh. So I put on Dumb and Dumber as soon as I finished this.
Oh, absolutely. No, it absolutely. It was just oh God, I'm literally getting choked up now just thinking about it. Like it's a movie that just is so resonant, and it's probably my all-time favorite, but in a way that I can't like articulate.
Yeah.
I would probably agree it's Charlie Kaufman's best screenplay. He has so many good ones though. So like, I mean, adaptations, Synecdoche. I mean, the man's a master.
Oh, absolutely.
But one of his best for sure. Michelle Gondry is like just one of the most bizarre visual filmmakers we have. If anybody has seen the series that he did with Jim Carrey,
yeah,
Kidding. Yes. Oh my freaking goodness. If you want another emotional wrecking ball, season 1 wrecked me on that show. But yeah, definitely Jim Carrey's best dramatic work. And I think it was the movie that really solidified for a lot of people that this was one of the most talented actors and performers in the industry.
Absolutely. And I would love for him to do another performance like this, not necessarily copying it, but on the same level of like dramatic and a nice incorporation of comedy. He's incredibly restrained in this movie. There are moments where he's able to do his goofy comedy, which is a nice refresher, but just the work that he brought here is great. And honestly, it would be really awesome if he and Kate Winslet work together again. I would love to see them do another film together. Like that would be a great pairing once again.
Absolutely. I mean, she's remarkable. I don't know. I mean, I did not really know about Kate Winslet as much in that era, in the period piece era. I think this was one of the first films that I was exposed to her.
Yeah.
And she's just she's a master. One of the best actresses working today.
I think she might be my favorite actress working today. Like she and Jessica Chastain 100%. Go neck and neck. Like they're the two for me. But yeah, that's my number 1. So now to recap our list from 5 to 1, Larry, would you like to recap the list for us?
Sure. So my number 5 is Bruce Almighty. My number 4 is The Mask. Number 3 is Liar Liar. Oh no, sorry. Number 3 is The Truman Show. Number 2 is Liar Liar, and number 1 is Jim and Andy: The Great Beyond, featuring a contractually obligated mention of Tony Clifton.
I was about to say, I hope you said the full title.
Oh, I had the full title, of course.
Yes, absolutely. So to recap my list, coming in number 5 is Man on the Moon. Number 4 is Liar Liar. Number 3, Dumb and Dumber. Number 2, The Truman Show. And my number 1, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. So that is over our list. So to talk about some of the films that didn't make the cut, are there any films in particular that you want to give a shout out to that didn't make the list? I know you gave a shout out before to I Love You, Philip Morris, which is very good. I enjoy that film myself. But are there any others that you want to give a shout out to?
Yeah, oh, definitely. I mean, there's so many. I Love You, Philip Morris, as I mentioned. Eternal Sunshine didn't make the list for reasons that I mentioned. Batman Forever is so much not Carrey's movie, and yet so much is Jim Carrey's movie. He gives a fantastic performance. He gives a fantastic performance in that movie. But I didn't include it here because I was trying to balance sort of the film itself and the depth of the film itself with the performance. And I do feel like, unfortunately, Forever is lacking a little bit in certain departments, which, there's a whole history to that film that you can get into. A shout out to The Majestic, which is one of his lesser known films from 2001. Another straightforward dramatic performance from him, very minimal comedy at all, but it's really a diamond in the rough. We didn't even talk about The Grinch, which I think is a lot of people's number one exposure to Jim Carrey as a performer. About full commitment.
That performance is. I'm not like a massive fan of The Grinch. It's not my favorite Christmas movie. I do enjoy it. It's fun because of him. That performance is one of the best performances I think he's ever given. And the physical, example of physical work, he's covered in all this makeup, and the physicality of that performance is really incredible. And I think it won the best makeup Oscar, and hopefully it did, because I mean, very deserving win, truly. And I still can't believe that that's a Ron Howard movie. I tend to forget Ron Howard made that.
That man is a chameleon, Ron Howard, the chameleon of Hollywood. Is all I
seriously.
Yeah, great. That's a comfort movie for me, The Grinch. Just a lot of fun. And I think the last movie I would also give a shout out to Kick-Ass 2. I think his performance in Kick-Ass 2 is very good. The movie itself, wonky, whatever. Yeah. But I think he really did a good job of sort of giving his own spin on that character and bringing him to life in a very, very interesting way.
Yeah, Colonel Stars and Stripes was a fantastic character, and the first Kick-Ass is one of my favorite films of the past 15 years. I do
enjoy the first one.
I adored the first Kick-Ass, and I was really disappointed with the sequel. I don't think it was awful by any means, but it was a massive step down, I think, from the first one. But when Jim Carrey was on screen, it was really high. It was a really strong addition to the cast. He was so good in that film. In terms of honorable mentions for me, now I will say this comedy to me has not aged greatly, but I love the first Ace Ventura. It always makes me laugh.
Oh, iconic movie. Yeah,
a fantastic movie. Just the way that he delivers all his lines, yeah, and you're ugly.
Hello, Satan. Oh, Mr. Hernandez, or whatever.
Holy Testicle Tuesday.
My favorite part of that movie is when there's that scene where clearly they are show that he's getting his dick sucked, and he's moving around like this, and you can clearly see his pants are still on.
Gee, let me think. Sure.
Yeah, not aged well at all, but another great transformative.
And then honestly, the entire sequence where he figures out Einhorn was
Ray Einhorn Finkel. Is Finkel. Finkel is Einhorn. Iconic.
Yeah, and then he has the plunger to his face.
Yeah.
Oh my god, just and then he just pukes, and then it just cuts to him in the shower going, no.
Oh my god. Yeah. Trans politics, horrible. But the comedy can't deny it. It hits.
Hi, I'm looking for Ray Finkel and a clean pair of shorts. Just the way he delivers everything.
The entire sequence in the mental ward. Put me in, coach. I'm ready.
I'm over here. Oh my god, great
Play that back in slow motion.
Just oh my god, it's great stuff. And then in terms of others, I mean, Bruce Almighty is good. The Mask is a fun time. I honestly didn't mind both Sonic movies. They're fun and cute and everything, but his performance in both of them is
great.
Amazing. Like amazing.
He's great in those for sure. And I also just thought about Yes Man. Yes Man is like a decent movie where a great high concept thing for Jim Carrey that he revels in a little bit. He has a lot of fun during that movie.
I haven't seen that in years. It's been a long time since I've seen that. It's directed by the guy who made Ant-Man, right? He directed that?
Peyton Reed. Yeah, that's correct.
You
don't have to watch the whole movie. Just find the funniest scenes and just have some fun with those.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So the closing thoughts on Jim Carrey. I mean, what can you say? He's one of the best comedic actors that we have ever gotten graced on the big screen. A fantastic dramatic actor as well. Jim Carrey is just one of those guys. He recently stated that he was possibly retiring from acting, and that was a really sad day when I found out about that interview. I was like, don't leave us. We need more Jim Carrey, but I respect his decision if he's ready to close that chapter of his life out and, focus on himself and do whatever it is that makes him happy. And hopefully, he'll come back with a great project. He has stated that maybe he'll be like a Daniel Day-Lewis where he's like picky with his roles and everything. And I'm very grateful for what we've gotten from Jim Carrey. And I'm just so glad that we have someone like him gracing the screen, giving us his presence, making us laugh, maybe making us cry, making us feel so many different things. A chameleon of an actor, a terrific performer, just one of the best that we've ever gotten for sure.
Yeah, I think that retirement was a long time coming. I'm honestly surprised that he even did the Sonic films because it felt like he was just sort of reaching the point where he was done with it. He's left so much of a mark on film and pop culture that he could leave. He could have left 10 years ago, and it would have been he would have left just as much of an impact. But yeah, I agree. I think what's most fascinating about him to me is that he's one of the few actors who is so transparent about his journey and about him as an actor. And I think there's a whole wealth of knowledge that can be obtained by going back to all of his movies and getting an understanding of who he was during all of these movies and how each one of them is placed in his journey. I think he thought a lot more about the roles that he took as an actor than most people give him credit for. And again, after watching Jim and Andy, it just totally reframed how I felt about him. And I feel like he's just one of the most fascinating minds in the industry, one of the most unique and subversive. He's given so many incredible comedic performances that bring me so much comfort, that make me laugh so much, but has also given so many incredible dramatic performances. Just my favorite actor of all time. Doubt that's changing anytime soon. Thank you, Jim, for all that you've done. Just an incredible life and career.
Seriously, Jim, thank you so much. And thank you, Larry, for coming on today to talk about Jim Carrey. Seriously, I'm so glad that we got to talk. Everyone listening, this may have been a very long episode, but this was an episode that I'm very glad that we did. The discussion and the passion and the appreciation that Larry has for Jim Carrey is the kind of passion that I love to incorporate on this show. So, Larry, once again, thank you so much for coming on to the show.
Thank you so much, Bryan, for having me. It really was a pleasure to come on and just share all of my thoughts, explode all of my thoughts about Jim Carrey that I've been holding in for so long. I look forward to having you, sir, on my show one of these days very, very soon.
Yes, I can't wait for that. And where can people find that?
Yeah, speaking of which, subtle transition to a humble plug. My podcast is called My Favorite Movie Is. It is a podcast all about the stories and experiences behind our all-time favorite movies. On each episode, the guest who we bring on gives you a new, unique, positive perspective on their all-time favorite film that will have you rethinking and reimagining some of the most beloved films of all time. Some of the films that we've recently covered on our show include Independence Day, The Sixth Sense, Jurassic Park, Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope. We've covered in the past Fight Club and Nightcrawler and the Back to the Future trilogy. We've covered so many of the greatest films of all time, and it would mean so much to me if you checked out our episode, any of our episodes, I should say, and give us a follow and check this out. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts, and you can also find us on our website, which is www.mfmipodcast.com. We look forward to having Bryan on the show to talk about his all-time favorite movie soon. And it was such a pleasure to be here, man. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. And you guys can follow this podcast on all the podcasting platforms. You can follow us on Twitter and Instagram. You can follow me on all social media platforms at Bryan Suffield. Very easy peasy. Guys, seriously, thank you so much for listening to this episode. And we will see you for the very next episode of Film Fragments. Take care, everybody.